In this 25th anniversary year of September 11th, the Tunnel to Towers Foundation continues to honor America's heroes. Heroes like Fire Lieutenant Michael Wells, who was inspired by 9/11 to serve his community. After 14 dedicated years of service, he lost his battle with occupational cancer, leaving behind his wife, Katie, and their 3 children. Tunnel to Towers honored Lieutenant Wells by paying off the family's mortgage in recognition of his sacrifices. Donate $11 monthly and amplify your impact with a car or land donation. Go to T2T.org.
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
People love him and respect him. Roger Stone.
Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone. Here's Roger Stone.
You are now entering the Stone Zone, and I'm your host, Roger Stone. You know, assassination is all too common in America's political history. Assassination of our presidents, I speak of. Of course, everybody's familiar with the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, murdered in 1865 at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. Then there was President James A. Garfield. He was murdered in Washington, D.C. in 1881. William McKinley became a late president in 1901. In fact, he was shot and killed in Buffalo, New York. When they put Governor Theodore Roosevelt on the ticket for vice president, the Republican bosses did that to get rid of him, to get him out of New York State, saying that we get rid of that damn cowboy. In the end, he became one of America's most popular presidents. Of course, all Americans, I think, are familiar with the brutal murder of President John F. Kennedy on the streets of Dallas in 1963. I believe that was at the hands of a conspiracy that involved Vice President Lyndon Johnson at the helm, the Central Intelligence Agency, organized crime, and big Texas oil. But many Americans are not aware that there were other attempts to kill American presidents. An attempt to kill Andrew Jackson in 1835 at the U.S. Capitol. An attempt to kill President Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt was actually hit, but because he was wearing a spectacle case, his opticians were Meyerowitz of New York, and a wadded-up speech. The bullet did not harm Roosevelt. He insisted on finishing his entire speech before he would allow them to take him to the hospital. There was also an attempt on the life of President Franklin Roosevelt. That was in 1933 in Miami, Florida. Of course, a Puerto Rican nationalist tried to kill President Harry Truman in 1950. Gerald Ford was the target of a assassination attempt by the followers of Charles Manson, specifically a woman named Sweekie Fromm. And then, ironically, President Ronald Reagan, the attack on him at the same Washington Hilton Hotel where there was an attack on President Donald Trump just this recent time period. There was also an attempt on the life of George W. Bush in Tbilisi, Georgia. And of course, Donald Trump has now had 3 or perhaps 4 assassination attempts. The first one in Butler, Pennsylvania, where but for a milli-inch, he would no longer be with us. Then a man stormed Mar-a-Lago with a shotgun. That was fortunately at a time the president was not there. He was shot and killed by Secret Service agents. Then there was the next attempt at the Trump International Golf Course in West Palm Beach, Florida, and now this most recent outrageous attempt at the White House Correspondents Dinner. 3 things bother me about the White House Correspondents Dinner. One is the fact that the Secret Service protection was so lax and that a would-be shooter got as close as he did. Secondly, outrageously, those online who are insisting that this was all staged, that this was some kind of false flag operation, particularly those who say that it all looks and smells like Roger Stone. I find that highly offensive. But then lastly, watching these so-called journalists grab the very expensive bottles of wine before they left the ballroom, really quite extraordinary. Now, in the wake of all this, in the wake of the attempted assassination and targeting of President Donald Trump over the weekend, serious questions are being raised about national security and the role that Democrats are playing in undermining it. Senator Dick Blumenthal of Connecticut, you remember him, he's the guy who lied about his military service in Vietnam. They call him Da Nang Dick. They're playing a substantial role. Blumenthal appeared on national television Monday downplaying concerns about the Department of Homeland Security funding, even as the agency remains partially unfunded due to a political standoff. While Blumenthal insisted that the Department of Homeland Security has the resources they read right now, he also made it clear that Democrats are unwilling to fully fund the agency long term without imposing restrictions on immigration enforcement. That stance is drawing sharp criticism, especially given the timing. The attempted attack on the Washington White House Correspondents Dinner has intensified scrutiny over security readiness, with officials warning that prolonged funding gaps can strain critical agencies like the Secret Service. The Secret Service used to be under the U.S. Treasury Department, but now, of course, it is under the Department of Homeland Security, the very department that Democrats refuse to fund. The broader funding fight stems from Democrats blocking full DHS funding unless limits are placed on ICE and Customs and Border Protection, moves that put partisan politics ahead of public safety. The contrast to me is stark. At a time when threats against American leaders are rising, Democrats are choosing to play political games, all because they support their mass immigration power grab over everything else. Consistent, full funding of the Department of Homeland Security is essential, not conditional. Weakening enforcement or withholding resources sends the wrong message at an extraordinarily dangerous time. It empowers extremists and potential killers like we saw this past weekend, but Democrats are completely shameless and frankly, they do not care. In fact, it is the overheated rhetoric of people like Hakeem Jeffries, Senator Chuck Schumer, AOC, Dick Blumenthal, and other radical Democrats. Chris Murphy of Connecticut, who goes outside the country to denounce the President of the United States as a threat to democracy. I frankly think that's treason. We have to get serious about the protection of our presidents and get serious about fully funding the Department of Homeland Security, under which the Secret Service is situated. Meanwhile, Jimmy Kimmel, the low-rated late-night host who poses as a comedian, is doubling down after he targeted First Lady Melania Trump, making a classless joke about the murder of President Donald Trump, a remark that came just days before an attempted far-left terrorist attack at the White House Correspondents Dinner. Kimmel mocked critics during his Monday monologue, dismissing what he called Twitter vomit storms, that's what he calls the criticism of him, and rejecting calls for accountability, taking no responsibility for his own words or actions. On Friday's show, Kimmel suggested that First Lady Melania Trump had the glow of an expectant widow, once again stoking the flames of hatred as he's been doing against President Trump and his supporters for over a decade now. Days later, Cole Allen, a 31-year-old public school teacher from California, was arrested after attempting to attack the Correspondents' Dinner venue after having been radicalized by media talking heads like Kimmel. Melania Trump condemned Kimmel's remarks as hateful and violent, urging ABC to act and warning that voices like his are contributing to America's deepening political divide. President Trump echoed those concerns, calling the comments shocking and demanding consequences. Kimmel, however, is refusing to stop, offering only a vague acknowledgement of fear caused by the weekend's events, while denying any connection between his rhetoric and real-world danger. Instead, he pivoted to attacking the president, deflecting the responsibility. It's time for ABC to do the right thing and pull the plug on Kimmel for good. Frankly, he is, no longer funny. Late-night talk shows are a dying medium anyway. Remove Kimmel, replace him with nothing, and the entire country would be much better off. Meanwhile, it seems like Iran is trapped as U.S. policy begins to grind them down. Tensions in the Middle East are reaching a critical point as the United States ramps up the pressure on the regime, with strong leadership signaling that America's interests and global stability will not be compromised. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, one of President Trump's very best appointees, describes Iran's Revolutionary Guard leadership as trapped, pointing to the effectiveness of a U.S. naval blockade that is squeezing the regime's economy and threatening serious fuel shortages. The strategy appears to be working, as Iran is now scrambling to negotiate. Iran has floated a proposal to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, but only if the U.S. lifts its blockade and delays addressing Tehran's nuclear ambitions. The Trump administration, however, refuses to budge. President Donald Trump made it clear that Iran must abandon any path to nuclear weapons, and emphasizing that peace could be achieved with a deal in the very near future, but only on America's terms. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Marco Rubio reinforced that position, warning that the U.S. will not tolerate Iran controlling or taxing global shipping through the straits. Freedom of navigation is non-negotiable, and Iran will not be allowed to hold the straits hostage. Meanwhile, Russia is openly aligning with Iran. President Vladimir Putin praised Tehran's actions as a fight for sovereignty, highlighting the growing divide between Western leadership and authoritarian regimes that are sticking together. At the same time, Israel continues decisive military actions against Hezbollah and their targets in Lebanon, responding to ongoing violations of an extremely fragile ceasefire. As negotiations continue behind the scenes, strong American leadership is once again being tested on the world stage, and I can't tell you how lucky we are to have President Donald Trump as our commander-in-chief rather than Joe Biden at times like this. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice and federal authorities are cracking down on a major Somali third-world fraud network, unsurprisingly in their enclave of Minneapolis, where more than 20 locations were raided as part of an ongoing investigation into alleged abuse of taxpayer-funded programs. The Department of Justice confirmed that the FBI, alongside Homeland Security investigations and local law enforcement, executed 22 court-approved search warrants tied to expected fraud. According to officials, the investigation centers largely on Somali-linked businesses, including child care facilities, accused of billing the government for services that were never actually provided. Among the sites raided were the Quality Learning Center and the Baby Halimo Child Care Center, facilities that had already drawn scrutiny after the hard-working citizen journalist Nick Shirley did an expose showing these daycare locations were vacant, non-operational, and otherwise unable to serve children despite receiving millions in public funds. Authorities stress the cooperation and operations focused on fraud, not immigration enforcement, but quite frankly, a lot of people running these operations need to be deported post-haste. Minnesota has increasingly become a hot spot for large-scale fraud cases in recent years. The massive Feeding Our Future scandal, which saw hundreds of millions in pandemic relief funds misused, exposed serious weaknesses in government monitoring. Dozens have already been convicted in that case, many tied to similar networks. These repeated scandals highlight the dangers of unchecked government spending and refugee resettlement, as Democrats look the other way while migrants come over into this country and rob the taxpayers blind. This is how they grease over their new constituents en route to destruction of America and a permanent one-party Democrat socialist country. The Department of Justice and Donald Trump must put an end to the spoil system immediately in Minneapolis and across the country so we can finally put Americans first. But my question is a simple one. What did Governor Tim Walz know, and when did he know it? If you're just tuning in, this is the Stone Zone, and I'm your host, Roger Stone. Now, officials in Florida unveiled a new congressional redistricting proposal that could dramatically strengthen Republican representation in the U.S. House, potentially expanding the state's current 20-8 advantage to a commanding 24-4 majority for the Republican Party. The plan, set to be taken up during a special legislative session, reflects ongoing concerns about fairness and accuracy following the 2020 census. State officials argue that Florida was significantly undercounted by more than 760,000 residents, meaning current district lines fail to actually reflect the state's true population growth. Supporters say the updated map is a necessary correction to ensure proper representation of Florida's rapidly expanding population. Maybe one of the few times that I agree with Governor Ron DeSantis, and I want them to pass this new congressional redistricting. You're listening to the Stone Zone right here on the Red Apple Audio Networks. Don't go away, because on the other side, we'll have more hot politics.
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
He likes politics and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone. Where's Roger?
This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Selling your car should feel like one less thing on your list, not one more. With Carvana, it is. Just go to Carvana.com, enter your license plate or VIN, and get a real offer down to the penny. No back and forth, no surprises, just an experience you can trust. Like your offer? Accept it. Schedule pickup, and we'll come to you with a check in hand. Your car, your timeline, your terms. Visit Carvana.com to sell your car today. Carvana. Pickup fees may apply.
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
Roger Stone, who's a one of the smartest political minds. Roger Stone was persecuted. People forget he's actually a brilliant political analyst.
Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone. Here's Roger Stone.
And we're back in the Stone Zone. Now, newly released FBI documents are reigniting serious concerns about political bias inside the federal justice system, with evidence suggesting that the Bill and Hillary Clinton Foundation was shielded from meaningful investigation despite many allegations that were credible of epic corruption. Senator Chuck Grassley made public a 12-page FBI electronic communications outlining a preliminary probe into the Clinton Foundation. The document details multiple claims of potential pay-for-play schemes involving foreign donations and political influence tied to Hillary Clinton and her family. Let's face it, Bill and Hillary Clinton are the penicillin-resistant syphilis of the American body politic, and Hillary herself would steal a hot stove. Among the allegations, millions in donations linked to foreign entities, including figures connected to Russia's notorious Uranium One deal, followed by favorable U.S. policy decisions. Other cases cited business interests in Bangladesh, Colombia, and Haiti, allegedly benefiting donors with ties to the foundation. In one instance, Boeing pledged nearly $1 million to the foundation shortly after a major international deal was reportedly facilitated that benefited the defense contractor. Despite the voluminous amount of evidence, internal resistance within the DOJ seems to have stalled the investigations. The Clintons were determined at the time to be above the law. Key officials reportedly declined to pursue charges, dismissed the evidence as insufficient, and even delayed investigative requests for years. While the Clinton Foundation probe was slowed or shut down, the FBI launched aggressive investigations into Donald Trump, his family and associates, including yours truly, based on completely bogus and promulgated claims, with the entire Russiagate debacle being a stain on the rule of law and constitutional jurisprudence. Now, thanks to the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, it's all out there in the public. She declassified the documents that demonstrate that there was no Russian collusion. Therefore, it's impossible for me to have lied about Russian collusion in my deep state trial in Washington, D.C., which was kind of like a Soviet-style show trial. The real question here for most Americans are, will we ever have a two-tier justice system? It's clear that the federal deep state has operated such a system that projects and protects political elites like the Clintons while targeting anyone who's an outsider. Transparency is always good, but it's time to lock these people up. Unless the Clintons, Obamas, and Bidens are thrown into prison after a fair trial, of course, the endless loop of corruption will never stop. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to The Stone Zone right here on the Red Audio Networks. Every day, 5 days a week, we talk about politics, news, history, style, and, well, sometimes we talk about food because, let's face it, I love to eat. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Roger Stone, and we'll be right back on the other side with more of the Inside Skinny on American politics.
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
Roger Stone, who's a one of the smartest political minds. Roger Stone was persecuted. People forget he's actually a brilliant political analyst.
Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone. Here's Roger Stone.
Back in the Stone Zone, I always thought that the COVID-19 pandemic was really just an excuse that was used by the Democrats and the deep state in order to steal the 2020 election. She allowed them to put in place mail-in voting Before we figured out he was a rat, U.S. Attorney General Bill Barr, in an epic interview on CNN with Wolf Blitzer, said himself that mail-in voting was an open invitation for voter fraud. Speaking of the pandemic and COVID-19, a bombshell indictment from the Justice Department is showing that America's top public health agencies during the COVID-19 pandemic may have been run by dishonest criminals. Who could have ever seen that coming? Federal prosecutors allege that longtime advisor David M. Morenz, a senior figure under Dr. Anthony Fauci at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, deliberately used private email accounts to conceal key communications from the American public. According to the indictment, Morenz and associates moved sensitive discussions off government systems to evade the Freedom of Information Act requests, effectively shielding critical debate about COVID-19's origins and U.S.-funded research ties to the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China. That research, which involved American taxpayers' dollars, has been the center of controversy surrounding the lab leak theory. It is widely believed that when confronted in the U.S. Senate on the floor by Senator Rand Paul about whether or not the gain of function took place in the Wuhan lab and was funded by Americans, Dr. Anthony Fauci simply lied to Congress under oath. Isn't that what they charged me with? Except for I wasn't lying, but he is, or was, and he should be prosecuted. Prosecutors now further allege that Morenz helped shape internal messaging that downplayed the possibility of the lab origin while also relaying information behind the scenes to top officials who briefed Congress, the White House, and the public. The charges paint a troubling picture of unelected bureaucrats influencing national policy while avoiding accountability. Adding to the concerns, Morenz is accused of accepting gifts, including expensive meals and wine, from a collaborator, then supporting scientific work aligned with that collaborator's preferred fake narrative. The charges, conspiracy, destruction of federal records, and concealment, carry the potential for decades in prison. While this is great news, it must all lead to the prosecution of Fauci himself. Dr. Anthony Fauci is the American Mengele, and he must pay dearly for the blood on his hands so that other tyrants of this type with God complexes never repeat this course of mass execution and death. I hope that Dr. Fauci and his wife, who made millions of dollars off the COVID-19 vaccination, get their just desserts. Meanwhile, Ukraine's government is once again extending sweeping wartime powers, raising sweeping questions about democracy and accountability as the conflict with Russia drags on. President Volodymyr Zelensky has submitted legislation to prolong martial law for the 19th time since 2022. If approved, the order would remain in place through at least August, continuing policies that have suspended all elections, expanded forced mobilization, and allowed Zelensky to shut down journalism in his country, shut newspapers, shut radio stations, arrest journalists, and shut down the largest church in the country. Under this martial law, Ukraine canceled both their national elections, including their 2024 presidential vote, and postponed parliamentary elections indefinitely. Beyond delaying elections, Zelensky's administration has also banned all opposition parties and shut down media outlets accused of pro-Russian ties. Among those affected was a major opposition party that previously received a significant amount of the vote in their elections they did have. These moves raise obvious red flags about political consolidation under the guise of national security. It also shows how the U.S. and the West have been played as suckers. We've been sold on giving aid to Ukraine to, quote-unquote, protect democracy, when in actuality, we're propping up an authoritarian dictatorship. President Donald Trump, in particular, has questioned whether democratic norms are being sidelined for too long in Ukraine. Zelensky has suggested elections could be reconsidered, but only if Western nations fund the process, as the welfare queen has always looked for an excuse to bleed his supposed allies dry. A recent video I saw showed men being dragged from their homes so they could be put in the front lines of a war against Russia that Ukraine simply cannot win. The globalist puppet Zelensky is truly one of the most heinous rulers we've ever seen in Europe and in many decades. He has no concern for his people. He was, after all, a comedian or a comedic actor, I think, hired to play the role of a president. It's very clear he has a cocaine addiction. You can sometimes see it. It is unmistakable. It's only a matter of time before he's forced to abdicate or face a mob once and for all. It's time to end this war, but it's certainly in time to end the multi-million-dollar subsidies to this corrupt, anti-democratic regime. Meanwhile, a massive high-tech data center project that is backed by investor Kevin O'Leary is gaining momentum in rural Utah, signaling what many see as a major win for economic growth, national security, and American innovation. State officials with the Military Installation Development Authority have approved key steps to move the multi-billion-dollar project forward in Box Elder County. The development, spanning tens of thousands of acres, would support military infrastructure and is expected to create roughly 2,000 permanent jobs, bringing new opportunity to a largely rural region. The project reflects a forward-looking strategy by attracting top-tier cloud computing giants while strengthening ties to critical military installations like Hill Air Force Base. With data increasingly central to both economic and national security, this positions Utah and the U.S. more broadly to remain competitive against foreign adversaries. The project will generate its own power rather than strain Utah's already taxed grid, with excess energy being feeding back into the system. This is an important point because the data center will expend a massive amount of resources, and it is expected to produce and consume more energy than the entire rest of the state. The initiative also includes aggressive tax incentives aimed at keeping America competitive for so-called hyperscaler companies, industry leaders like Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. Officials argue that these incentives are a smart investment, not a giveaway. Officials argue, once again, that this potentially generates tens of millions of dollars annually for local communities. Data centers, when appropriately designed and making sure that they foot the bill for the resources they consume rather than local taxpayers, are going to revolutionize commerce in this country. We just must make sure that this powerful new technology runs for the benefit of the people, not a hindrance to the American people. Meanwhile, Cuba's farmers are struggling as the communist regime there continues to crumble. Cuba's deepening economic crisis is once again exposing the long, painful consequences of communist rule, where decades of centralized control and failed policies have left the island vulnerable, inefficient, and unable to feed its own people. Across the country, Cuban farmers are struggling to operate without basic resources like fuel, functioning equipment, or reliable infrastructure. Crops are going to waste, livestock production is declining, and food shortages are worsening for millions of Cubans. While the regime blames U.S. policies, a convenient scapegoat by the Cubans for decades, many observers point to the real root of the problem, which is a broken communist system that has crippled productivity and innovation for generations. Even before recent geopolitical tensions, Cuba's state-controlled economy was already failing its citizens. Government mismanagement, lack of private enterprise, and strict controls over agriculture have created a system in Cuba where farmers lack incentives and resources to succeed. Now, with limited fuel and outdated equipment, many are forced to rely on manual labor or animal power, lacking the machinery necessary to create the food so that the people can thrive. Ordinary Cubans are paying the price. Food quality is declining, prices are soaring, and basic staples are becoming harder to find. Many are forced to choose between essential items just to get by. For older citizens, the situation is particularly dire, with some returning to physically demanding farm work simply to survive. This crisis is not new. It's in fact entirely predictable. It's the result of decades under a communist regime that suppresses economic freedom and discourages growth. While leaders continue to deflect blame outward, blaming the Yankees for all their problems, the reality is clear. Without meaningful reform and a move forward towards free market principles, the Cuban people will remain trapped in a cycle of scarcity and hardship. This is why President Trump needs to take action in Cuba, similar to the successes he's achieved in Venezuela. I remember one of my wife's last relatives got out of Cuba, and we were amazed when he arrived in Miami how incredibly painfully thin he was. And he described an average week. He said that you would be given a potato, and you would divide the potato into 6 pieces. On each day, you would eat a piece of the potato, and on the 7th day, you would drink the water that the potato had been boiled in. That's communism. In a refreshing display of patriotism, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth joined the famous musician Kid Rock for a high-profile ride in U.S. military Apache helicopters, celebrating the strength of the military and the spirit of national pride. Hegseth praised Kid Rock as a patriot, longtime supporter of America's troops, highlighting the importance of recognizing those who stand behind the men and women in uniform. The flight, featuring elite American pilots, showcased the professionalism and capability of U.S. forces during America's 250th birthday, with officials emphasizing the need to honor service members and reconnect with the country's founding values. Pentagon leadership said moments like these help bridge the gap between civilians and the military while inspiring pride in the next generation. This particular event followed fake news-generated controversy over a prior helicopter flyby near Kid Rock's Tennessee home, which had drawn criticism and even triggered an investigation. But Hegseth, the Secretary of War, stepped in, ended the probe, and defended the troops involved, making it clear they shouldn't be punished for a harmless and uplifting moment. This is exactly the kind of leadership we need to see from the administration. Unapologetically pro-military, supportive of American culture, and willing to push back against the critics who downplay patriotism. At a time when national unity is disintegrating due to the actions of the radicalized far-left Democrats, moments like these remind Americans what pride in America and respect for those who defend it really looks like. We definitely hope to see more of this as America continues to celebrate this historic semi-quincentennial, the 250th anniversary of the greatest nation on earth. Meanwhile, the Department of Housing and Urban Development is taking decisive action to roll back the policies that have caused many years of radical social policy. HUD is effectively restoring biological reality to federal housing rules and prioritizing the safety of women. Under the leadership of Secretary Scott Turner, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, they announced that it will remove gender identity language from roughly 50 regulations, replacing it with clear, biologically based definitions of gender. The move is expected to have immediate impact, particularly in women's shelters, which now will be reserved strictly for biological females. How about that? For years, federal rules required shelters to admit individuals based on their self-declared gender identity. In other words, men and women's shelters. Policies which put vulnerable women at risk and open the door to abuse. HUD officials say those days are over. Secretary Turner made the administration's stance clear, emphasizing that there are only 2 sexes, male and female, and that federal policy should reflect that reality. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to The Stone Zone. Don't go away because we'll be right back on the other side with even more.
This is The Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
He likes politics and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone. Where's Roger?
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
Roger Stone, who's a one of the smartest political minds. Roger Stone was persecuted. People forget he's actually a brilliant political analyst.
Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone. Here's Roger Stone.
And we're back in the Stone Zone. Former President Barack Hussein Obama is drawing sharp criticism after claiming that the motive behind Saturday night's attempted shooting at the White House Correspondents Dinner remains unclear, despite authorities already releasing a manifesto spelling out the suspect's intent. In a public statement, Barack Obama urged Americans to reject political violence, but said details about the motive were still unknown. That assertion quickly sparked a backlash from conservatives and law enforcement voices who made it clear that the facts are already on the table. Officials identified the suspect as Cole Allen, a far-left California public school teacher who allegedly authored a manifesto targeting President Trump and members of his administration. The document reportedly outlined plans to assassinate Trump officials from highest to lowest, while attacking the president's immigration policies and his Christian beliefs, clear signs of a radicalized, politically motivated attack. Prominent Republicans didn't hold back at Obama's shameful silver-tongued spin doctoring. Senator Mike Lee of Utah called the motive obvious, while administration officials like Lee Zeldin, the EPA director from New York, blasted what they see as willful blindness from Obama and other political leaders unwilling to confront left-wing extremism. The incident unfolded, of course, at the Washington Hilton, ironically in the same space and in the same hotel where there was an attack on the life of President Ronald Reagan. The incident unfolded where the annual dinner of the White House Correspondents was held. I don't think very highly of the White House Correspondents Association, in all honesty. They gave an award to CNN because they said that CNN's incisive investigative reporting had led them to send a camera crew to my home at 6 o'clock in the morning in 2019, the year in which I was arrested. In fact, when that went down, I was arrested at 6:11. At 6:22, a CNN correspondent texted a copy of my sealed criminal indictment to one of my defense attorneys. And if you looked at it, you would see that it had the initials and the metadata tags of the prosecutor who wrote it, Andrew Weissman, without any question, the single most corrupt and evil prosecutor in U.S. history. Of course, the leaking of a search or arrest warrant advanced to it being executed is a felony, but the judge in my case, of course, could care less. So the White House Correspondents Association gave CNN an award for what was obviously an inside job. By the way, CNN just happened to have cameras outside the Arlington, Alexandria apartment of Paul Manafort, my old partner, when he was arrested in the Russian collusion hoax. It's time to call the Washington Correspondents, or the White House Correspondents Association, what it is. These people are not journalists. Beyond the fact that they stole all the wine before leaving the occasion, these people are propagandists and liars for the Democrat Party. Journalism, as my good friend Sean Hannity often says, is dead in America. One of the few places you can still get the truth is right here in the Stone Zone, where we join you 5 days a week, every day, with the inside story on American politics and what's really going on in the nation. I thank you for joining us today, and until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed.